Delighted to introduce now Richard McIntosh, who is the Assistant Chief Plant Health Officer for DEFRA, who will give you an insight to the regulatory requirements and particularly plant health requirements in the coming months and years. Thank you, Richard. Over to you.
Afternoon, everybody. As Nigel has just said, I'm the Assistant Chief Plant Health Officer in DEFRA, so we're the government department which is responsible for plant health matters. My particular role is developing policies on particular pests and diseases, but also currently representing the UK on the relevant Brussels committee which looks at plant health issues. So these are the issues I thought it'd be helpful to cover with you today. First of all, why is plant health such an important issue, we believe? Secondly, I'll explain something about what our current import requirements are. Then I'll go on to explain the actions we take in response to persistent interceptions of pests and diseases. And I'll provide some advice to those exporting countries in the room about what you can do to avoid actions against your trades. And then I'll conclude by mentioning some forthcoming changes. Okay, so why is plant health such an important issue? Well, it's really because plants are so valuable. I'll put some figures up here. So we estimate that around about £8 billion worth of value to UK society comes from protecting our plants and crops. So around 3 billion of that is due to commercial crop and horticulture value. Around 1 billion from commercial value of forestry and sawmilling, and 4 billion from social and environmental value of forestry and trees, although that's likely to be a significant underestimate due to the difficulties of estimating social and environmental values. Of course, plant health is also very important in relation to maintaining a vibrant export trade. So our healthy plants contribute to food and drink exports of around about £20 billion to the UK economy. And of course, they also contribute to a healthy, vibrant environment which supports an outdoor recreation industry worth around £20 billion per year. Okay, so what are the rules and requirements for importing plants and plant products? Well, they're based on international standards. So these require technical justification of any measures which are going to introduce barriers to trade. And the aim is to keep the UK and wider EU free of what we call quarantine pests. So quarantine pests are those pests which have an economic or environmental significance, but are not present and not established and subject to official control. So those rules are important both to protect the health of plants, but also to facilitate trade. The requirements are always underpinned by evidence. So in the plant health world, we talk about pest risk analysis, and these are prepared by international organisations such as the European Food Safety Authority, the European and Mediterranean Plant Protection Organisation, or by individual countries. So a summary of the actual controls which apply to imports of plants and plant products. Some of the highest risk commodities are prohibited altogether from certain parts of the world. So that would include certain rooted plants and trees. Then there's a category where we believe that the risk can be mitigated effectively, allowing them to be imported. They're what we call controlled commodities, so they can be imported with a phytosanitary certificate. So that category would include most plant and material and fruits, and also some cut flowers. And then there are other commodities which we believe represent a low risk to our plant health status, so they can be imported without any plant health restrictions at all. There may be other requirements which apply, but from a plant health point of view, there are no restrictions. So that would include a number of cut flowers, some fruits, and most vegetables. Okay, so a lot of the requirements in terms of plant health are imposed on the exporting country, but we also have an auditing system when those goods are received in the UK. So the default position is that 100% of the controlled commodities that I mentioned must be inspected. So in the UK, or in England or Wales, I should say, that role is performed by inspectors from the Animal and Plant Health Agency, which is part of DEFRA. But there is a system of reduced frequency import checks in place also. So this relates to specific commodities from specific countries where it's been possible to demonstrate that the level of plant health risk is low due to a good trade-in record with few or no interceptions of pests and diseases. And that reduced check system does mean a lower cost of the import process and an increased efficiency of that process. So, how are decisions taken in relation to plant health? How do we decide what to control and what not to? At a European level, this is carried out by a committee called the Standing Committee on Plants, Animals, Food and Feed. So this committee meets monthly. It reviews the effectiveness of plant health controls and agrees action in response to particular problems which emerge. So that may be on the basis of a risk analysis that's being performed. It may be on the basis of interceptions or outbreaks that have been experienced by the member states within the EU. So we use data that's been generated through import inspections and other sources to identify where stronger controls are going to be needed. It's also important to say we're not just looking at trades from outside of Europe, we're also looking at issues which apply within Europe, and if measures are needed on trades which are moving from one EU member state to the other, then they are also acted upon. And it's also this committee which carries out the annual review of the reduced import check system that I mentioned. So, what actions are taken in the event of persistent interceptions of plant pests and diseases? Well, there is a proactive and a systematic approach to identifying issues and taking action. The legal position is that there should be zero findings of the so-called quarantine pests. But in practice, action is targeted at cases where we believe there's been a systems failure in the exporting country or where there's a pattern of persistent interceptions. So the interceptions are monitored on a monthly basis by the standing committee that I mentioned to identify trades where there may be emerging issues. And where that's the case, actions may be agreed, which could include sending warning letters to the exporting countries. It could be asking the Commission to carry out an audit of the export system in the country concerned, or it could actually be new legal restrictions for a particular trade. So it depends on the seriousness of the situation. And the Commission published what's called an alert list, which is essentially a list of those trades where there's been a pattern of interceptions. So they're the trades which the Commission are going to be focusing on in relation to possible actions. So for those of you from exporting countries, if you want to know where to look, where the Commission might be paying attention, the alerts list is the right place to start. And this is just an example of the alert list. So you can see, this is an example of the alert list. So you can see that it includes details of the country concerned, the number of harmful organism interceptions on particular commodities, and it also includes details of the particular pests which are being intercepted. Okay, so actions in response to persistent interceptions. What does the Commission actually do where there has been a persistent case of interceptions? And these are just some examples of actions that have been taken in recent years. So you can see there that there is details of actions that have been taken in relation to imports of citrus fruit. Also actions in relation to the false codling moth, where there have been repeated interceptions over a number of years. Most recently, there have been measures taken in relation to a pest called the fall armyworm, and this has resulted in a new trade being regulated for the first time, sweet corn. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about the fact that we're not just focusing on trades from outside of Europe, the UK has taken measures in relation to potatoes from Spain, due to findings of a flea beetle called Epitrix, and so there are measures in place requiring washing of potatoes from Spain. It's also important to say that good practice is also recognised. So it's not just about taking actions and restricting trade. Where there's good evidence that a trade has been improved or cleaned up, then the Commission also takes action there. And here are a couple examples. Firstly, in relation to India, where there had been previous restrictions on a number of products from India, which were not prolonged due to an improvement in the export system there. And similarly in relation to Ghana, where again there'd been a pattern of interceptions which resulted in import restrictions, but those have now been allowed to lapse on the basis of a more positive picture in Ghana. Okay, so that's the EU situation, but I thought it might be helpful just to show the UK picture and how these sorts of actions translate into action at a UK level. So this particular slide shows the exporting countries and the number of interceptions by exporting countries coming into the UK. And you can see in 2015 there that there's quite a significant increase in interceptions from Ghana. That contributed significantly to the EU decision to restrict trades from Ghana. And you can see that the impact that had on the number of interceptions in subsequent years. So there's been quite a significant fall-off in 2016 and 2017 as a result of those measures. If we look at it from a commodity point of view as well, here's another example. So you can see that in 2014, peppers, capsicum, were regulated for the first time. That resulted in quite a significant increase in interceptions on capsicum the following year. That trade is now settling down to a certain extent, so the numbers are dropping away again, and the overall picture is of a declining number of interceptions overall. So you might say, well, you know, how does that relate to the number of imports and number of inspections that are carried out? But you can see that that's actually against a background of increase in imports of controlled goods, and also increase in inspections of controlled goods. So it's quite a positive picture actually. So I mentioned the reduced check system, and that's perhaps something to aspire to, where it can be demonstrated that a particular trade has a good record of plant health. In that situation, it's possible to get that trade recognised for reduced checks, which means instead of inspecting those trades at 100%, a reduced check is agreed, which can be anything down to around about 5%. It depends on how good the plant health record is. So there's over 50 trades included on that list at the moment. So you can see it covers flowers, fruit, vegetables and wood. And this just indicates the parts of the world and the types of commodities which are subject to that system. So the system is reviewed on an annual basis. And where there's evidence that perhaps it's not working because there are some interceptions associated with those trades, the inspection level goes up. But equally, where there's evidence that it's working effectively, and we're not seeing interceptions, the percentage inspection rate can be further reduced. And the system actually includes quite a number of important trades for the UK. So this is the list of 50. And its relevance to the UK. And you can see the darker the line, the greater the number of consignments which are coming in terms of imports. So the black line is over 2,000 consignments per year. So you can see there's some quite important trades there for the UK. Okay, so what should exporting countries do to avoid the need for actions either by the UK or the EU more generally? These are just some ideas which I would like to promote with you based on what I've seen as a result of audits and what I've seen in terms of the discussions that I have at EU level. So first of all, it's pretty obvious to say, do what you can to ensure full compliance with the import requirements and make sure you have a properly resourced and a properly trained inspection service. If there are emerging issues in terms of interceptions, please do make sure that they're followed up at an early stage and acted upon. All the interceptions are reported back to the exporting country through a system called Eurofit, so they all go to the official body, the official plant health authority in the country concerned, and it's really important to ensure timely follow-up of those interceptions. If that doesn't work, if the problems are persisting, then the Plant Health Authority concerned may want to sort of go to a stage further. So that could be about limiting exports to certain approved exporters who are able to meet requirements. It could even mean a voluntary suspension of certain trades. That's something that some countries have operated and which has been quite effective at reducing the overall interception levels. It's also important to make sure an early and comprehensive follow-up to any warning letters which are received from the Commission, and make sure that if there is an audit by the Commission, there's full cooperation and transparency, and timely and effective follow-up of any recommendations that are made as a result of that audit. In some cases, technical assistance is possible, either through official sources or through commercial funding, and of course it's important to take that up where it is available. So, that's the current position. What's actually on the horizon? Well, as I'm sure you're all aware, from March 2019 next year, there will be EU exit. There are remaining uncertainties arising from that, but one thing I can say is that whatever the system we're going to be faced with post-EU exit, plant biosecurity will remain an important issue. The UK government has made that very clear, that plant health remains an important priority for them, so that will not change. More immediately, or perhaps I should say with more certainty, we know what is coming from the new EU plant health regulation and the official control regulation, which will come into force from December 2019. And again, plant biosecurity is very much a feature of this new legislation. It also promotes a risk-based approach in terms of inspections and in terms of trades to regulate. And there are also features there to improve the speed with which decisions are taken by the Commission and Member States, and to improve collaboration between the plant health authorities of the Member States. So we're currently in a 3-year implementation period for that plant health regulation and the official control regulation, and the detailed legislation which sits beneath that general framework is currently being negotiated. In terms of imports, these are the sort of key features to keep an eye on. First of all, there will be an extension of the list of goods which require a phytosanitary certificate. At the moment, there's a fairly sort of restricted list of goods that will be much extended in future. We don't know the full extent as yet, that's still being negotiated, but it will be significantly extended beyond the list which currently exists. There may be some limited exemptions, but they will be very limited indeed. There will also be a more proactive and a more robust approach in terms of those high-risk trades where the risk is so great, if you like, or the uncertainty is so much that we're not able to permit imports at all. So the aim is really to prohibit those trades until such time that a risk assessment is available to demonstrate that the trade can continue safely. There are criteria already agreed and set out in the regulation, but the actual list of trades which will be included on that list is still being negotiated. Okay, so if you want more detail, if you want more information, DEFRA have a website, the UK Plant Health Portal, where we publish all our information. So you'll find information on there about specific pests and diseases and other issues of relevance to plant health. And if you want to explore in a little bit more depth the risk associated with particular pests or particular diseases, I would encourage you to have a look at the UK Plant Health Risk Register, which can be accessed through the portal. We have around about 1,000 pests on there, with links through to accompanying information such as the pest risk analysis and publicity information, etc. So, just to conclude, plant health is and will remain a high priority for the UK. There are import requirements in place. They are there to protect plant health, but they are also there to facilitate trade by providing clear and transparent rules to the industry and making sure that the industry as a whole is operating to a level playing field. There is a system in place to review threats systematically, and actions have been taken and will continue to be taken in response to persistent interceptions. There are certainly certain things that exporting countries can do to avoid that sort of action, and one important thing is to avoid appearing on the Commission's alert list, or if you do appear on the Commission's alert list, take whatever action you need to get off it as quickly as you can. UK importers can obviously do their bit as well by careful sourcing, by making sure they're looking at where they're sort of importing from, and they have the necessary measures in place to mitigate those plant health risks as far as possible. There are opportunities for lower costs and improved efficiency of the import process through the reduced check system. And in terms of looking to the future, EU exit is obviously an important aspect, but please don't take your eye off the ball as regards the new EU regulations which are coming up as well, which will have an increased focus on plant biosecurity. And please do make maximum use of the Plant Health Portal and the UK Plant Health Risk Register. Thank you very much.